good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning because we have a lot to get to. We've got some comments after yesterday's program we're going to read here to kick off the show. Some New York State issues. We're looking at the potential of a government shutdown, though it looks like a deal has been made. We'll talk about that. Obviously, the Trump campaign, the Harris campaign, all that, and much, much more. How will we fit it in 2 hours? We'll see. Comments from viewers yesterday. A question every Democrat needs to ask themselves is, when one of the world's leading, historic, successful people of our time, Elon Musk, endorses Donald Trump, why would you question his judgment over anyone else? It's a slap in the face to Elon's genius and success. Thank you very much. Another comment from a viewer after yesterday's program, coming in a little bit late yesterday. Why on earth can someone from another country buy and own American soil? If you go to a different country, you have to follow their rules and regulations. American soil should only be owned by an American, no outside influence, period. 100% American. Give tax breaks. If it's not for the best for America, don't bend and bow down and tax them. Thank you very much. That has been a major issue in the news of how much farmland and land in general is owned by foreign entities. So thank you for those comments. If you're new to the program, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. You can reach out at any time. I try to get to as many of the comments throughout the program as we can to make this a part of our conversation. Okay, as an update from yesterday, nearly 500 have been killed as Israel strikes 300 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon in a massive barrage. Now, of course, the all-out war threat is looming. That's what many are talking about this morning as the UN meets today. We're going to talk about that. Israel hit the terror group Hezbollah with an all-out air offense yesterday in what Lebanese officials called the deadliest day for the country in nearly 20 years, killing nearly 500 people and wounding more than 1,500. The latest blistering attack on 300 Hezbollah targets by Israeli Defense Forces comes after its military chiefs vowed tougher actions against the Iran-backed militant organization, which has been amping up its own assaults on the Jewish state. The IDF says its objective was to destroy Hezbollah's capability to attack Israel, targeting the group's leaders and its missile stockpiles. The ultimate goal is to finally allow thousands of evacuated Israelis to return to their homes in the north of the country following months of protests from the evacuees. Monday's strike by Israel also was the first time in the deadly back and forth, which began when Hezbollah started firing at Israel on October the 8th, that the Israeli military issued a warning in southern Lebanon for residents to evacuate in the face of extensive strikes. Now, we learned yesterday that the U.S. will be sending more troops to the Middle East because of the fear of the all-out war. Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder made the deployment announcement yesterday, but provided no additional information regarding the number of additional troops or their intended mission, citing operational security. The unknown number of forces would join the 40,000 troops already in the region. Ryder said yesterday, in light of increased tension in the Middle East and out of an abundance of caution, we are sending a small number of additional U.S. military personnel forward to augment our forces that are already in the region. Now, former Trump National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, you may remember that name, he was interviewed yesterday on Fox News, and he said Israel does not trust the United States. And this goes back to, for a long time, but we mentioned this recently when it came to the pager explosion, that America was not informed of this ahead of time because there was fear from Israel that word would spread from America to the people that were going to be attacked and that it would be thwarted, which says a lot about where our policy stands right now. But back to what General Kellogg said. Israel does not trust the United States right now to be any type of peacemaker at all. They've just disregarded what the United States is going to do. They're going to handle this on their own, and I think they're going to be able to do it now. You can really see that they've shifted away from Gaza, looking at the airstrikes and looking at the map, that the targets that they've hit look what they did to the command and control. Look at them taking out major infrastructure as well. They're really planning to go ahead and really hard, and they're going to solve this. And I think Netanyahu has got it right. He has decided to take a plan, go forward with it, and actually eliminate, at least from the south, all Hezbollah positions to allow those people you mentioned, between 60 and 100,000 to return to their homes. And I think he's making a real point. I don't think this thing is going to de-escalate at all. I think you're looking at an escalation, not only today and tomorrow, but in the coming weeks. This fight is far from finished. And yet Netanyahu has said from the beginning that, people can weigh in on this as much as they want, but at the end of the day, he's looking out for what's best for his people. It's interesting to see how, of course, and we've talked about this so often, how the media covers it. There's this strain of kind of anti-Israel, especially anti-Netanyahu in the media, that I'm just looking at this one, and I didn't even mean to necessarily call this out for what is a bias. But when I was looking this morning on CNN, they had what happened in Lebanon and why is Israel attacking Hezbollah. So I thought, well, I'll look at this and see kind of the who, what, when, where, and why. And so I was flipping through it, and I come to this question that they asked. Were civilians targeted? Now think of the loaded language there. As if Netanyahu is sitting there saying, let's target civilians specifically. This is what, when they have done the opposite. Precision, pinpoint, attacks in hopes of minimizing casualties. This is how CNN words it. Israel said it was targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, but video shows destruction of residential areas, and the large death toll reflects the scale and intensity of the strikes. The nearly 500 killed on Monday alone is roughly half the number of Lebanese killed throughout the entire 34-day war between Israel and Hezbollah back in 2006. So were civilians targeted? That's a very interesting and loaded way to refer to that. Now, this comes on the heels of the United Nations coming to New York. A lot of talks about the security. And I'll pose this question early on, and we'll get to it later on in the program. But as we talk about Secret Service and protection, they released that letter from the alleged assassin, essentially, that went after Donald Trump II, assassination attempt. And they released that letter. Bill Barr saying he's dumbfounded that they would release that letter where you can read it. We're going to talk about it. What were your thoughts when you saw that was released yesterday? I am not going to read the letter. We will talk about the news of the letter being released, but kind of shocking. Not only reading the words, but thinking that the DOJ put that out there for public consumption at a time of heightened tensions, right? But Biden's going to address the United General Assembly, the UN, General Assembly, for the last time as dictators and despots come visit New York. Now, Putin's not going to be there. Chinese President Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, they will not be there. But the Iranian president is set to give a speech despite international pushback amid Tehran's support for terrorism, interference in November's U.S. election, and assassination attempts or threats against American politicians, including former President Trump. So Iran is known to be involved in those, and yet giving a speech at the United Nations General Assembly, giving the speech today. According to reports, the Iranian president said to reporters, "We don't want war, we want to live in peace." But his comments are not expected to be taken at face value, and Biden, who will speak ahead of the Iranian president, will rally global action to tackle the world's most pressing challenges, said White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Biden is expected to outline his administration's priorities and vision for the international body and what will be his last address to the UN as president. According to U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, Washington has three major areas of focus it will emphasize during this week's events, including continued efforts to end the scourge of war, as roughly a quarter of the world's population lives in conflict-affected areas amid mounting wars. So some are looking at it as if Biden is trying to, as CNN puts it here, burnish foreign policy legacy I'm not sure what that foreign policy legacy is, as, let's face it, the world is on fire right now. Maybe trying to, I guess, say here, and this again coming from CNN, maybe trying to rewrite history in a way. After more than 5 decades at the forefront of the United States foreign policy, President Joe Biden may have hoped to use his speech to over 100 world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly to burnish both his own legacy and the country's leadership on the world stage. But an escalation in what was already a major crisis in the Middle East means the world will be listening for short-term solutions on top of capstone remarks on how his presidency will be regarded in history. Senior administration officials acknowledge that Biden, both in his remarks to the General Assembly and in engagements with world leaders, must confront that reality as Israel carries out extensive military strikes across Lebanon that so far have killed hundreds, and this again coming from CNN, including children. According to, who is it according to? The Lebanese Health Ministry, the propaganda arm of terrorists. That is even acceptable to quote is just shocking. In meetings, Biden and top U.S. officials will be discussing what can be done to stabilize the situation, while noting that Biden plans to address the Middle East, especially this very, very difficult year that we have all gone through. That's an exact quote from one senior official. So there's a quick look at international affairs. Now, according to the New York Post editorial board, and I know I'm running just a tad bit late, deal with me here. If President Biden had any decency, they said, he'd limit his United Nations speech Tuesday to 2 words, "I'm sorry." Kamala Harris should echo that. Obama's defense secretary, Robert Gates, once warned, and all too rightly, that Biden had been, and I quote, wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. And unfortunately, he and Kamala have continued that pattern in the last nearly 4 years, leaving the world facing the most dangerous threats in decades. And we can go through, starting from the beginning with the withdrawal, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and fast forwarding to today. And remember, this is at a time when Harris bragged about being the last person in the room when Biden made the fatal decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. And I don't want to go through every single thing that Biden has failed on, essentially, foreign policy-wise, over the last 4 years. But now that the world is on a brink, according to the New York Post, an all-out war in the Middle East that could well rope in America, and another if Russia defeats Ukraine and then looks to expand even further, and still another when China makes a play for Taiwan, which I think is sooner rather than later. We talked about this on the program extensively, former congressmen and others, about the real threat of China and the threat that they make their move on Taiwan. And what would we, and I'll pose this question to you as well, what would we as a country do? Don't underestimate Joe's ability to, we'll say, screw things up, is what President Barack Obama reportedly warned years ago. That's not the word he used, but you get the idea. Sadly, American voters did just that in 2020, and now the entire free world is paying the price. And that's why I know we've had comments from viewers, and we've heard from Trump supporters in the past saying that Trump should do maybe a more efficient job of saying, remember, during my 4 years, there was peace and prosperity. So not only prosperity at home, but peace throughout the world. Worth mentioning. All right, we've got a lot more to get to. I wanted to kick off with that update from yesterday's program, that sort of breaking news. We'll be focusing on much of the political scene this morning, and a few, like I said, specifically New York State issues. We're going to hear from Congressman Nick Langworthy in a statement that he released. That's coming up a little bit later on as well. We have a couple of, I don't want to say oddball stories, but not really stories that we'll focus a lot of time on, but I think worth mentioning that you may not get elsewhere news-wise. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just an update on universities and college campuses. No, it's not about protests, as we've talked about so frequently, the anti-Semitic, anti-American protests that have just been a scourge of college campuses for the beginning of this semester, beginning of the school year, and the end of last. But this is interesting when you see a university maybe bite off more than they can chew. Boise State University administrators now owe a coffee shop over $4 million because a jury unanimously ruled the school officials violated the woman's First Amendment rights in a conflict over her public support of law enforcement. So this coffee shop owner on campus had a pro-law enforcement display. And because remember, very often it's the grown-ups in the room when we talk about college campuses that are the ones that want to stifle free speech and want to, well, for example, why did so many, specifically at Columbia University, why did the dean, the president of Columbia University, step down? Well, the biggest pressure came from the faculty and the students because she had the audacity to call the police to end the destruction and the chaos. When you would say, well, shouldn't she have been fired for allowing that to go on for as long as it did and go unchecked and the encampments grow? Nope, it's because she decided to end the destruction and call the police one time. But I'll continue. The jury awarded Big City Coffee owner, her name's Sarah Fenley, $3 million for lost business, reputational damage, mental and emotional distress, and personal humiliation in a decision reached on the 13th of September. Jurors awarded her an additional $1 million in punitive damages from the school's former vice president of student affairs. Now, she had originally sued the university for $10 million after she closed her campus shop in October of 2020. She argued that administrators, yes, the grown-ups in the room, conspired to retaliate against her for expressing pro-police views on social media, for having the audacity to support law enforcement. A lawyer for the administrators denied any retaliation and accused Fenley herself of trying to get the university to infringe on student speech rights. Big City opened on campus in September of 2020 on the heels of the nationwide police reform protests that followed George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis. Fenley's support for law enforcement, she displayed a thin blue line sticker near the door and immediately stoked anger among student activists. I don't want to go through everything. We don't need to hear the whole history. But what was said is senior administrators at BSU caved to a very small number of student activists. The university terminated her contract because of her support for police, a move her lawyer said clearly violated her free speech rights. Hours before the meeting started, administrators were working on a press release about the business leaving campus, making it clear they had a single outcome in mind. Boise State Attorney Kelly Duke argued Fenley was actually the one seeking to suppress speech. All right, so awarded $4 million. We don't always have a positive story on the back end of school protests, so there was one that I wanted to mention. Okay, we've got a couple of quick things, as I mentioned, that we're going to go through before we get into kind of the heavy topics. Here's a question I posed to you, and this is coming from The Atlantic, just out of pure curiosity. The Atlantic says legalizing sports gambling was a huge mistake. Now, I know this has just been growing and growing. It's amazing. $35 billion in bets they are estimating will be made in 2024. That's about 1/3 more than last year's total, which was a banner year. If you follow sports, gambling is everywhere. Ads for it are all over. More than 1 in 3 Americans now bet on sports. Wow. Now, they said, and this is The Atlantic, a growing body of social science literature suggests that, yes, this is in fact quite different than just the games that you used to play before legalized gambling. The rise of sports gambling has caused a wave of financial and family misery, one that falls disproportionately on the most economically precarious households. 6 years into the experiment, the evidence is convincing. Legalizing sports gambling was a huge mistake. Your thoughts? I just saw that this morning, kind of piqued my interest. Okay, one last. No. We're going to save it for after the break. We have some news, local news, that I think you're going to find very interesting. And then we're going to get into the government shutdown. Then the Trump campaign, the Harris campaign. What is being said? What is being done? Weigh in on it this morning. What are your thoughts? I know there's been a lot of rallies in Pennsylvania. We're going to show you what Trump had to say yesterday. We also, and people keep asking, the vice presidential debate is happening, and it's coming up on October 1st. So I've had people comment on that. So there we are, October 1st. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking after this. And we are back. Broadcasting live from the Heselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. You're watching Frankly Speaking. Thanks so much for joining us. Big announcement from Congressman Nick Langworthy yesterday. More than $860,000 in federal funding to expand the Newtown battlefield. That's, of course, in the town of Ashland in Chemung County. It has been awarded $860,278 to be exact by the National Park Services for the acquisition of the 322.09 acres at the Newtown battlefield. The grant, awarded through the American Battlefield Protection Program, will protect and preserve the historical site of the Revolutionary War's pivotal Battle of Newtown. As you see there, the congressman saying the Newtown battlefield is a treasured and historic gem in Chemung County. This investment will allow the town of Ashland to preserve this important part of our nation's history for future generations while promoting local tourism and education. Preserving our historic battlefields also honors the sacrifice of those who gave their lives and ensures that their heroism, is never forgotten. I thought that was a nice announcement to hear yesterday. According to the National Park Service, the American Battlefield Protection Program aims to invest in the long-term safeguarding of significant battlefields across the country. By investing in these preservation efforts, the program ensures that historic sites are protected from development and remain accessible for public education and commemoration. So there we are. Great news coming from the congressman. All right, let's get into, speaking of the congressman, we have, who was on the program, 2 weeks ago, talking about the potential for a government shutdown. Now, he said at the time, and I believe there's no reason to believe he changed his opinion, that he is for, even if it's a continuing resolution, for keeping the government open. The government is preparing for a partial shutdown with 1 week until the deadline, even though there is allegedly, for lack of a better word, an agreement made where it does look like another scenario where Mike Johnson is going to put up his plan, and it will need heavy Democrat support because there's going to be Republicans, and we've seen this play out numerous times, that are pushing back against it. This is tricky. Obviously, we're talking about a little over, which is hard to believe I'm about to say this, a little over a month before the presidential election. I don't think Republicans would want a government shutdown at this time. But the clock is ticking. The deadline is September 30th to fund the government. And even with that possible deal to avert a lapsing in funding, parts of the U.S. government will start the behind-the-scenes process of preparing for a potential shutdown. Now, there are negotiations going on. Originally, the House Rules Committee, this was yesterday, opted against voting on a short-term spending bill that would avert a government shutdown, setting the stage for a scenario in which House Speaker Mike Johnson will need to rely on Democrats to pass the contentious measure. Johnson's 3-month continuing resolution, which would keep the government funded through December 20th. It's amazing to me where the deadlines always seem to be around holidays, around times where you don't think you'd want to be debating, because the same thing's going to happen again. It always comes down to the wire. It always comes down to the last seconds, last minutes. So December 20th, you'll start to see the headlines saying, will they have to stay through Christmas to get a deal done, that type of thing. Representative Thomas Massey, a member of the Rules Committee, argued that the House Speaker was attempting to set up a government funding crisis the week before Christmas to pressure lawmakers to vote for a bill that would be written behind closed doors. Why Christmas? So he can pressure members to vote for a bill they haven't read by using their desire to see their families on Christmas Eve against them, said the Kentucky Republican. Whoa. We should fund the whole thing for a year, Massey said. Without a rule, House GOP leadership is expected to bring the spending bill to the floor under a procedure known as suspension of the rules, which requires a 2/3 majority vote to pass. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise indicated that the plan is to bring the continuing resolution, or CR, which you'll hear a lot about, up for a vote tomorrow, Wednesday. The Republican caucus has a slim majority in the House, meaning that several Democrats will need to support the 3-month continuing resolution for it to pass. Now, he unveiled his Plan B spending plan Sunday. We mentioned it on yesterday's program. After the House rejected his first proposal, which should really at this point in the game come as no surprise if you've been following this. While it is not the solution any of us prefer, it is the most prudent path forward under the present circumstances, the Speaker said. As history has taught and current polling affirms, Shutting the government down less than 40 days from a fateful election would be an act of political malpractice. So House Republicans are going to rely heavily on Democrats to keep the government open. So this is already a somewhat of a PR win for Democrats, being able to come out and saying we had to help save the Republicans from themselves in a way. And you might not like that. You might say, shut it down. I'm just telling you what the media's coverage is going to be, especially this close out from a presidential election. They'll somehow try to blame the potential shutdown on Trump. So the House Rules Committee stripped the government spending bill from consideration last night. So this is somewhat breaking news, forcing House GOP leadership to tee up the spending bill under a procedure known as suspension of the rules, as I just mentioned. Relying on Democrats to overcome their narrow, divided majority and keep the government open has been a regular occurrence for Republicans this Congress, and was the exact maneuver that got former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy ousted from his job. Republicans have long known they need to rely on Democrats to pass the shutdown averting measure this time around, but with Democrat votes now likely to vastly outnumber the GOP supporters, Mike Johnson finds himself in a risky position with his conference. Jim Banks of Indiana said it is disappointing. We have a Republican majority. We should be cutting spending. Asked if Johnson has mishandled the situation, Jim Banks said he had an opportunity to put a spending bill on the floor and cut wasteful spending. We have had the majority for 2 years. We haven't seen that happen. That was my hope with a Republican majority, but we are going to finish the Republican majority without cutting spending, and that is why I am voting no. Byron Donalds, who many considered to be a potential pick for vice president by the former President Trump, he is also against the clean government spending extension, saying, I would say it is a mistake. I would say for me personally, it is something that I cannot support. Frustrations are also rising toward the Republicans who refuse to vote for the bipartisan spending bill, but also oppose any GOP spending plan that would help give their side leverage in talks with Democrats. Mike Simpson of Idaho. What's funny is that a lot of the same people who don't like the CRs don't help us get the bills across either. All right, there you are. So there's your update. It looks as if there will be some type of deal struck. This is a topic that the media loves because they can very often paint Republicans, or they try to paint Republicans in a bad light when it comes to government shutdowns. Now, my thought has always been most people are not, government shutdowns are not a top of their priority list, because we know what happens when there's a shutdown. There are certain, and I think this got to hurt if this is a part of your job title, non-essential jobs that kind of quote unquote suffer. But obviously the most important, those that are essential are still fine to go about their business. So I don't think this has the PR that the media thinks it does, but it is something they run with extensively. So we'll see where it all plays out, but it looks as if there could be a vote on that as early as tomorrow. Let me take a short break. And when we come back, we are going to dive in to the presidential elections. What are your thoughts? And I understand Bill Barr's thought on it. Releasing that letter from the alleged attempted assassin, the second, word for word into the media. And I know Donald Trump Jr. was very upset about it as well. We're going to talk about that. I can understand the term dumbfounded. I don't think it was the best move. You know, we've heard so much in the past, if there's a school shooting, something like that, about copycats. And we see, a lot of people taking the tact and trying to do so here as well, to not show the person, to not highlight them, only to highlight the facts of who, what, when, where, and why, to not to, somehow create these copycats, to see the attention he is getting and talk about the attention he's getting. This is literally his... It's not even, you can't say it's a manifesto. There's pieces in this letter talking about him giving money to someone that can pull it off. Is that something that we want out there in the media? But the media has ran with it. A lot of people upset that the DOJ released it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also raising the question, just for whatever reason, I find it interesting, the Atlantic saying legalizing sports gambling was a huge mistake. Your thoughts? I do know that there's a lot more people talking about it. People who I would say in the past, I would know wouldn't be quote unquote gambler, now knowing everything from money lines to the spread. It is interesting. So your thoughts, has it changed your life for better or for worse, or not at all? Just a question to pose this morning. All right, let's take that break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us. We're covering a lot this morning. I know it seems like we've packed in quite a punch in the last nearly 40 minutes. It is 6:38. All right. So back to this question, and I don't want to fall into the trap of reading it. Before we get, and I know I said I was going to kind of focus on the campaigns, and we are going to focus on the campaigns. But the man accused of trying to assassinate Donald Trump at his Florida golf course wrote a chilling note months earlier. And this is what's really weird. There's a little bit of confusion here in my mind. So he wrote this note months ago, and in the note he said, I'm sorry I failed you type thing. But also saying that he intended to kill the former president. He dropped the note addressed to the world in a box in an unnamed person's home in the months before the foiled September 15th assassination attempt. I guess where I find it strange is, how did the person then that found it say, hey, maybe I should check for this? Or maybe there's got to be more behind the scenes, that somebody knew something. I, again, do not want to read what was in this letter. You can find it for yourself. It is, I think it's dangerous to release this letter in a way. The handwritten note was only discovered after the person opened a box and alerted authorities in the wake of Ralph's arrest. Well, where the box also contained ammunition, a metal pipe, miscellaneous building materials, tools, 4 phones, and multiple other letters. It wasn't immediately clear if Ralph allegedly wrote the note on the premise that the assassination attempt would be unsuccessful, or if he was referring to another apparent plot. Now, prosecutors had argued that Ralph should be kept in jail ahead of the trial, while federal public defender Christy Militello asked for the defendant to be allowed to live with his sister in North Carolina as the case goes forward. But the U.S. Magistrate Judge Ryan McCabe ordered Ralph back behind bars, saying the weight of the evidence against the defendant is strong. So again, I'm not going to read the letter to you. Bill Barr, and I'm telling you more about this to get your opinion on it. Bill Barr, former U.S. Attorney General, he panned the Justice Department for releasing this letter. He said, I was dumbfounded that the DOJ made public this morning the contents of the letter that Ryan Ralph left with an acquaintance prior to an attempted assassination of former President Trump. Now, again, the letter addressed to the world. So you know, and we've talked about this in the past, about this attempted assassin, that he had delusions of grandeur, that he felt just like when he was getting involved with the war in Ukraine, he thought he could end the war, that type of, it's been called a Messiah complex. So writing a letter to the world, believing that he had the power to end the, and that's what's also interesting, because yesterday, I don't know if you saw any of Zelensky kind of criticizing Trump, almost campaigning for Harris, and many criticizing that as well, saying poor timing when a very pro-Ukrainian person just tried to assassinate the president, the former president, and some of the words that they used, some of the, and there's a piece here that we may get to suggesting that same exact thing, that if you read that letter, if you were to read that letter, it uses many of the talking points that we see coming from Democrats and in the media. But I'll continue. Barr said the letter calls on people to, quote, finish the job of killing President Trump. It attempts to rouse people in incendiary terms to do so, and offers $150,000 to anyone who succeeds. There was no apparent justification for releasing this information at this stage. Now, some critics have noted how authorities had declined to release the Nashville shooter's lengthy manifesto carried out by a suspect who allegedly identified as a transgender man that shot up Covenant School last year and killed 6 people, including 3 children. So saying kind of, why do you release one letter and not the other manifesto? Barr said, even if DOJ thought it is important to provide the letter to the court, it could have redacted inflammatory material or arranged to have the letter submitted under seal. It was rash to put out this letter in the midst of an election during which 2 attempts on the life of President Trump had already been made. It served no purpose other than to risk inciting further violence. I would have to agree. It seems like a very wrong-headed decision, as Bill Barr saying, dumbfounded. Donald Trump Jr. asking, why is Kamala's DOJ publicizing Ryan Wesley Rouse putting a bounty on my dad's head? That's a fair question to ask. Why they felt the need to release the letter in full. Very good point. Now, Daniel McCarthy says the confession letter shows how Democrats have stirred up violence against Trump. And I was thinking about this because, when there's some type of, some Facebook post or something done by a Republican, Democrats very often, the media will very often go after every Republican and have them disavow what was said or disavow this person. Or how do we stop things like this from happening? The Republican, relatively silent when it comes to the 2 assassination attempts. Obviously not saying to Harris, do you disavow this or what can be done? Daniel McCarthy says the man who intended to murder Donald Trump on September 18th has explained in his own words why he wanted to do it. The words aren't only his, though. They're also the slogans and cliches of Trump's Democratic opponents, virtually verbatim. He left a letter with a friend months ago to apologize in case his assassination attempt failed. What's been released so far makes Rouse's political motives clear. He saw Trump as dangerously unfit for the presidency and a threat to peace. He was incensed Trump terminated Barack Obama's deal with Iran. And I don't want to go into quoting all this. If it all sounds familiar in what he said, if you read it, it's because Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Trump's legion of Democrat and ex-Republican detractors have supplied the premises for stopping the former president by any means possible. After all, if democracy really is at stake in November, voters themselves must be suicidal even to consider voting for Trump. Democrats have created, just to wrap it up, because I don't want to get too much into, just to give you Daniel McCarthy's opinion on this, but Democrats have created an extraordinary climate of fear around Trump. And if they don't weigh their words more carefully, more violence will follow from the likes of Ryan Routh. Okay, let's see, we have some comments on that. Your thoughts? We're going to talk about the campaigns themselves. But yeah, I guess yesterday when I saw that and I saw the release of it, I would have to say I was a little shocked, appalled at what the letter said, of course. But I instantly realized it's not something we'll read to you on the air because I think that just does more damage. But something worth noting from Bill Barr's comments. All right, let's take a short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. You're watching Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Thank you for joining us this morning. A comment from a viewer. And this is a very good point, I think. Not sure what the motivation was to release this letter. Maybe it's an attempt to appear transparent after the way they handled the first attack on Trump. That could be it, but in its entirety, to me, just seems like a wrong-headed decision. If that was their reasoning, it's still wrong-headed because, as Donald Trump Jr. said, in the letter, Routh essentially puts a bounty on Trump's head. So is this the right timing? Also, I will ask your opinion on Ukrainian President Zelensky coming here and, as many put it yesterday, really campaigning for Harris and going after Trump, Vance. Your thoughts on that as well. Now, Harris came to New York. Vice President Kamala Harris came to a New York City fundraiser, and much like Biden, when they had the big event, Biden, Obama, Clinton. Well, Harris raised $27 million at this New York City fundraiser that happened on Sunday. It was a packed New York City fundraiser, her largest fundraising haul since she took over at the top of the ticket. Though Harris has far more money than former President Trump, the money will be needed to compete with pricey advertising by deep-pocketed outside groups to support Trump, according to ABC. The blockbuster fundraiser was held at Caprini Wall Street in a massive Greek Revival ballroom with over a dozen columns. Much of the crowd stood shoulder to shoulder as Harris needled Trump for refusing to debate her again. My opponent seems to be looking for an excuse. I feel very strongly that we owe it to the American people, to the voters, to meet once more before Election Day. Interesting. It's kind of hard to take that high road when, if you want to speak to the American voter, you could also go to the media at times. You could also hold press conferences. She told reporters after landing outside Washington, "We have more to discuss." So she is starting to give a little bit more of that quick comments to reporters on kind of the tarmac. But will we see a press conference? Yet to have a press conference since becoming the presumptive nominee, then the nominee. Now we know what Donald Trump's reasoning is for not doing the debate, saying that in many states early voting has already begun, so it's too little, too late. And also, I would say there's an argument to be made. Now, I know it's a different news outlet, but the debate between Harris, the moderator, is so biased and really going unchecked. It's not as if the media was critical of them, other media outlets. Actually, this is something that they probably are going to use as a game plan, because what we learned from one of the moderators is that beforehand, much like Trump doesn't really prepare for a debate all that much, but like Harris was preparing for the debate, they sat in a room as well and had someone there, so when they asked a question pretending to be Trump, that they could be prepared for any quote unquote thing he said that needed to be fact checked. They did not practice that on Harris, as we saw when Harris brought up really early out of the gate Project 2025, and they did not fact check her in real time. So they had prepared to fact check Trump because, and it was admitted, because they thought Biden did such a poor job that basically they didn't want Harris to do a bad job. So they, in fact, became a part of the campaign arm of Harris by being there to go after Trump. So Trump can make the argument that, yes, even though it's a different outlet, this seems to be par for the course. That every outlet that he goes to is a hostile network at this point, except for Fox. And we've talked about this on the program numerous times, and so many people have commented, why not go to Fox? Harris would not accept that. So, I mean, I guess you could come out, and if she's suggesting that Trump's scared, why wouldn't that same line of reasoning work on her to be scared to go to Fox News? And, did you see that? What was the interview on? It was on a local, because she started doing more interviews on local news outlets. And they asked her about what's she going to do to bring, relief to families with their high grocery bills. And her answer continues to be, and this has kind of been her career, so it's not knocking her. It's just maybe more significant now that she's running for president, having not secured the vote for that job, never receiving a vote. So to keep her, to see her keep saying the same thing, which is, quote, "I grew up a middle-class kid and I will never forget where I came from." That's not really an answer. She keeps focusing on where people were really proud of their lawns. Again, I'm not sure that's doing enough. And I don't know if you're an undecided voter. I'd love to hear from you. If you're an undecided voter, does that do enough to kind of quell your concerns and say, oh, okay, well, your neighbors like their lawns and you were a middle-class kid, so you have my best interest at heart? But it is funny because they'll say, well, these stubbornly high grocery prices. But then other outlets will say at the same time, no, what are you talking about? They're not bad. Look at my stats. Look at my paperwork. They're not stubbornly high. You are just not smart enough to understand when you look at your grocery bills, that the economy is actually booming. All right, we got to take a break, though. Wrapping up this hour. Moving quick. My goodness, we always do. Stay with us. And we are back. Wrapping up our number one of Frankly Speaking here this morning. Hard to believe. Hour one in the books. We've got 1 hour left together. We are going to talk about the Harris campaign. more about the Trump campaign, asking the questions, your thoughts about the release of that letter from the attempted assassin of President Trump. Your thoughts on that, the second assassination attempt, your thoughts on the release of that. To the one viewer's comments, I think it's a good point that perhaps the DOJ is trying to look more transparent after it looks as if they tried to hide, to cover their you-know-whats, to hide so much with the first attempt in Butler. And I understand, and I've got a little update on that Trump will be visiting Butler again. I'll get that to you in the next hour. Here's a comment from a viewer as we wrap up this hour. I hope all the American people remember that our government was formed on the of the people, by the people, for the people. Vice President Harris wants it to be of, by, and for the government. Thank you very much. Keep those comments coming in. We do have a New York State issue. I asked a question and no one seems to want to respond, so I'll stop. Was legalizing sports gambling a huge mistake? That's what the Atlantic contends. What's your thoughts? Also ask your opinion, and this will be interesting to get your feel for it. Are you supportive of Speaker Johnson and what he is doing currently to keep the government open, working with Democrats to get that CR going? Would you have been fine with a government shutdown? Do you think, if you are fine with a government shutdown, do you think it's the right thing to do right now for the future of the country, meaning with the presidential race at hand? I mean, it's hard to believe that it is already September the 24th. We're talking about election in just a very, very short time frame, coming up in a little over a month. Unbelievable. So what are your thoughts about the potential of a government shutdown? It looks as if it has been averted, but you like the way it's handled. This seems to be so common that it's not surprising. And also the December 20th extension, and then of course right around Christmas, and you can see those headlines already. We could probably do that, frankly speaking, ahead of time, pre-tape it about what is being said. Will they have to stay? Will Johnson keep them there? They've got to rush through a vote, all those type of things. So what's your thoughts on that? Those are the topics of the show this morning thus far. We've got 1 hour left together. If you're new to the program, you see the number on the bottom of the screen. Feel free to reach out and comment on these topics of the day, 607-358-3131. So there you are. Again, thank you. I know I mentioned it yesterday on the program, but thank you again to everybody who donated for the Walk to End Alzheimer's for Team Big Fox. It was a huge success, the event itself and the fundraising here at Team Big Fox. Very proud of it. We made the champion club. Had a great time at the track. The weather, it held out. It wanted to put a monkey wrench in everything, but we had a blast. So thank you to everyone who donated. I can't thank you enough. We've got the best viewers here on Frankly Speaking that want to help the community and want to help charitable organizations. So we do appreciate it. All right, stay with us. Hour number 2 on the way after this. Welcome to hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking. Thank you so much for joining us. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. And I'm your host, Frank Acom. A comment, if you're just tuning in. We've had a lot that we've talked about. I'm not going to recap it all because I kind of recapped it at the end of the last hour. But we're going to continue our discussion on the Harris campaign, on the Trump campaign. Your thoughts on the release of that letter from the attempted assassin. That what Don Jr. calls essentially a bounty. Your thoughts on that? Comment from a viewer. Harris refusing to debate on Fox will only be discussed on Fox. So the diehard Democrats and sheeple will never hear that she refused to debate. They only hear the huge voice from the operable wing of the Democrat Party saying Trump is scared to debate her. Yes, obviously it's accepted. I mean, I think it even goes without saying. It's accepted that she, or any Democrat for that matter, it's not just her, they're just not going to debate on Fox, which I think is a mistake. I could see Fox even going, just to err on the side of caution, would definitely be more fair than any other outlet. But yes, I don't even think it's an option. I don't even think it's something on the table any longer. It's just known that they're not going to debate at Fox. So yeah, you're not going to see Harris scared to debate on Fox anywhere other than Fox. But you're going to hear over and over that Trump is scared to debate Harris. And let me pose that question too, because I know I've thrown a lot of questions at you this morning. Would you have liked to seen Trump give another debate, have another debate with Harris? Were you happy with the one, or as he said, really, two? That there won't be a third debate. What were your thoughts when he made that announcement? I've always kind of leaned towards another debate, only because Harris there's so few opportunities to hear her unscripted with no teleprompter. And she is not always the best in that scenario. I think that's why she's not doing the Al Smith dinner. As a matter of fact, I don't think I'm going to get into it because Piers Morgan's sometimes a little over the top for me. But he highlighted the fact that Kamala Harris has declined, and it's predictable that she declined to attend the annual Alfred E. Smith Memorial Foundation dinner in New York. We had, for lack of a better word, predicted it last week that she wasn't going to do it. It didn't seem like that's in her wheelhouse. It's spontaneous. It's got humor involved. But it is a fun event, and I assume Trump's still going to do it, where it's kind of like the old celebrity roasts, where each candidate kind of needles each other, has a couple good friendly digs at each other, and boom. But not this year. Harris told organizers she won't be there because she says she needs to focus on her campaign. The Al Smith dinner has always been a useful campaign opportunity for candidates to show they can laugh at themselves and raise millions for charity, all in front of a very big TV audience of potential voters. The only reason, according to Piers Morgan, that she has turned it down is because of fear. Kamala won't be there because she has an unmitigated terror of being trapped outside of her robotic teleprompter comfort zone. And that's true. She needs to go to friendly outlets and have what is essentially scripted answers ready. I mean, you may have seen the clip yesterday where they asked a local outlet. That's why she likes going to local outlets, because local are not as apt to do follow-up or demand, kind of, for lack of a better word, an answer. So she goes to the local outlets, and there yesterday, again, when they asked her about how she's going to help the voter out there that can't pay their grocery bills, can't pay their bills, and she went on a story about how she grew up as a middle-class girl whose neighbors really liked their yards. It was kind of a weird answer. Oh, we got a lot of comments come in. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the waves. Thank you for all the comments. So back onto the Harris campaign. This was kind of breaking news yesterday. Campaign officials for the Harris campaign have weighed a potential visit by the vice president to the U.S.-Mexico border while in Arizona on Friday. Now, this is an interesting kind of turn in events, and that what CNN specifically is saying from insider sources of the Harris campaign is it's because the polling numbers are so bad for Harris when it comes to policy, her immigration policy. That should come as no surprise. That's something that's been discussed time and time again. I don't think you really needed anonymous sources to get to the bottom of that. But immigration is featured prominently in this election. Democrats, grappling with years of the border crisis, have tried to flip the script on Republicans after the GOP blocked a bipartisan border measure. I don't know if that works. I understand why they're doing that. Don't get me wrong. Because having your candidate as a border czar and seeing the border crisis that has been an unmitigated disaster. So when they have to try to spin it, as you do in politics, you blame the Republicans because they didn't support a bill that was already so many years in a White House that had done nothing about the border crisis yet. So I'm not sure. Yes, the media's done a good job of pushing it. I'm not sure if that necessarily works at the end of the day. But some Harris campaign officials remain concerned about the gap in polling, which shows Trump holding a lead on the issue, but also sees an opportunity to narrow a gap that they believe is closing and try to shut down GOP attacks over her not visiting the border enough, according to one of the anonymous sources. No decision has been made, according to one source. Friday's visit to Arizona also comes at a time when border crossings are the lowest they've been since 2020. Comes on the heels of new polling that shows Trump leading in the battleground state. Last week, Harris slammed Trump over his immigration proposal, citing his controversial policies to draw a stark contrast with her Republican rival. Now listen to what, again, this is coming from CNN, so keep it in mind. Ready for this quote? Republicans have falsely claimed that Harris is the border czar, casting her as solely responsible for the management of the U.S.-Mexico border. It's a title that Harris's team has been trying to shake off since the moment President Joe Biden assigned her to tackle root causes of migration in 2021. So how is that falsely claiming that she's the border czar? It was the media themselves that kept pushing that title. And who was it, Axios or was it Politico, that came out right after Harris got the nomination? Or actually, I think she was presumptive nominee when Biden had kind of passed the torch and had said, well, no, she wasn't the border czar. Even though we reported on her being the border czar all these years, we were wrong in our reporting. Which is really an interesting way of having to spin that. So as long as you just put out, apparently in a statement, Republicans have falsely claimed that Harris is the border czar, I guess it no longer makes it something that the media pushed for 3.5 years. That many people have given her that label. So interesting to kind of the rewriting of history there. But we'll see if she visits the border. That was always remember when she had that interview that went so poorly? It's one of the people point to saying, why have you not visited the border at this point? And I'm saying something to the extent of, well, I haven't visited the border of Europe either. What are you trying to say? Not good and off-the-cuff remarks, ad-libbed remarks. Spontaneity is not her necessarily strong point, and they know that. That's why the campaign is being run this way. This is not telling tales out of school. This is why they're running the campaign that they are. Not going to the Al Smith dinner because she has to rally, but remember, the rallies work out great because they're, again, a teleprompted event. And this is not to knock teleprompters. Every politician uses them. But those seem to be the lion's share, if not higher than the lion's share, of events she is participating in. Now, according to the New York Post editorial board, and if you recall yesterday, I had that report that I brought to you about the U.S. homeless explosion, and the numbers are startling. While the Post editorial board says you have to look at Kamala Harris and the policies of this administration, that you look at them and they are to blame for the disaster and the homeless explosion. Open border fanatics claim their policies come from a place of deep empathy. But a cursory look at U.S. homeless data proves they're lying. January saw that at least 550,000 people reported homelessness, up 10% over the January 2023 figure, which was, back in January 2023, the then highest ever reported. It's no coincidence that same month saw the highest ever number of illegal immigrants jumping the southern U.S. border. Indeed, Massachusetts data show that nearly half of the families in the state's family shelter systems are migrants. Despite what the border erasers scream, it's commonsensical that the entry of huge numbers of people with no jobs or homes, or easy ways of getting either, would swell the ranks of the homeless. To see the magnitude of the crisis, look at the projected cost of the migrant tsunami to New York City. According to the New York Post, it is expected to be north of $12 billion through next year. And that's New York City. Imagine what it looks like on the ground of these smaller areas throughout the country that have been straddled with this. On top of driving up homelessness and tax burdens, the sheer scale of the incoming waves guarantees social strain and decay. And that's to say nothing of the lone wolf criminals and organized gang members who are streaming across as well that we're seeing so much coverage of on certain outlets. There is not a single social ill in the United States that the migrant crisis has not made worse. It utterly gives the lie to the humanitarian argument so beloved of the left, and proves yet again that Vice President Kamala Harris, a chief architect of the disaster, does not deserve anyone's vote in November. That's from the New York Post. Your thoughts on that? When we come back, more on the Harris campaign, then the Trump campaign, plenty left to discuss. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. And we are back. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you for joining us this morning. So many comments coming in from viewers. Let's get right to them. All this budget maneuvering is just typical Washington can kicking. Sure is. Hence the December 20th day. You're right. It's predictable. I look forward to the house cleaning Elon Musk will provide to effectively rid us of wasteful government spending. Yes, he said he would take on that role. But the Washington can kicking is just kicking the can down the road. This is so predictable. The timing is not ideal, obviously. All right, another comment. Frank, I had a chuckle when you said spontaneity wasn't Harris's strong point because I can't think of anything that is her strong point. Thank you, Ken. Here's another comment. How about this? Go Bills. All right. Thank you for that. Big win last night, so we'll put a wave there with the Go Bills. Appreciate you writing in. Another comment from a different viewer. I'm hearing that Harris is spending $5 million per day on her campaign. That is troubling. Yes, according to Fortune magazine, it's right around $5 million a day. She's outspending Trump about 3-1. The money came in. Again, this is why it's important to know when we hear so much about big money in our politics, big money has never played a more outsized, oversized role than it has in this presidential election. Because remember, when the big money stopped going to Biden, that's when the decision was made that he had to go. And the party that he supported for 50 plus years turned on him. So the big money dried up. And then when he stepped down and endorsed Harris, Harris had the floodgates open and all that money came to her. And that gave her the momentum, right? That the media kept talking about the momentum with the money behind her and so much support for her. So yes, about $5 million on her campaign, $5 million a day. Whew. Now, Kevin O'Leary, who we've quoted in the past, he spoke with Fox News, Your World. He was from the show Shark Tank. Well, Kevin O'Leary said, I don't know yet because I don't have any details from Harris. She has been all sugar, no protein. That's it. And it's become a really big sticking point with investors. We got to remember, we have the largest economy on earth. Over 85% of our jobs are created by the private sector. Business investors like me and leaders have to deal with whoever is in the White House in January. So whoever ends up on the 6th of November as a new mandate will have to deal with them. So we need data. We need policy. And I'm getting a little critical now because I don't have any. So I need answers around taxation. I really need to understand the idea of price controls. Yes, remember, the first thing she pushed, and this has been, sadly, for lack of a better word, forgotten by the media, was this price control. But I'll continue with what Kevin O'Leary had to say. I really need to understand the idea of price controls. That did not work in the 70s and doesn't work anywhere else. And this whole idea of taxing unrealized gains, you have to remember at the number one export of America is the American dream. This is a 200-year-old economy that's based on supporting entrepreneurship. That destroys capital formation. Those ideas are beyond non-starters, referencing price controls, taxing unrealized gains. And that has been one of the criticisms, of course, of Harris by even some outlets that are really friendly to her. They're concerned that the undecided voter who hasn't made up their mind somehow yet, the undecided voter does not believe there's enough substance, enough policy coming from Harris. So as the media keeps pushing that debate was a huge victory for Harris, again, the words are even getting stronger and stronger the farther we get away from the debate, hoping to convince you that it was more impactful than it was, or if you didn't watch it, tell you that it was just, it was so clearly one-sided. But anyway, we'll continue with what my tangent is here. That the undecided voters, again, the media told us that Harris won. They're watching and saying, well, yeah, but the reason I tuned in was to see substance, and the substance wasn't there from a candidate that didn't have to go through the primary process, didn't have to debate primary challengers. So we don't know. The only thing we know about her policies are from when she had to go through that process back in 2019. And those comments that she made at the time, she's now been actively disavowing, actively doing a 180, U-turning on them. So what is the real answer? If you're not the same Harris that you were in 2019, what can we expect the Harris will look like in January if you were to take over? I think those are fair questions from the somehow undecided candidate, or the undecided voter. Now, out of Axios, Axios is what you consider a more liberal publication. Alex Thomas warned on Monday that there could be subtle finger pointing within the Harris campaign if polling goes south for the vice president, citing that there's some tensions within her operation. Now, this should come as no surprise. We've heard of tensions and a lot of people that worked for Harris leaving that job, quitting that job back when she was still, well, I mean, she is still vice president, of course, but in her time as vice president, having trouble with retention, keeping employees because it's a tough working environment, these type of things. So these kind of tensions. Again, it's coming from Axios. This is not coming from any type of conservative outlet. These polls in Kamala Harris's world are really sort of keeping together this campaign, because this campaign, this is not the ideal way to run a presidential campaign. You know, entering just a few months ago, and then a lot of these people are not people that she hired that are on this campaign. It's sort of a combination of Biden people who she doesn't totally trust, her own people, plus all these Obama 2012 operatives. This, again, Alex Thompson from Axios speaking with CNN this morning. While Harris has surged in national polling, new swing state polling from the New York Times Siena College shows former President Trump leading in key states such as Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona. So Thompson said as long as the polls are good, then things are going to keep going well. But if the polling ever turns south, there are a lot of sort of subtle tensions within this world, and you could start seeing some subtle finger pointing. Now, that being said, they're going to keep saying, we are the underdog, we are the underdog, we are the underdog. That is their talking point. That's part of the reason also that they're not doing interviews, because they feel that they can still coast and let Donald Trump be the main character and possibly still win. So Thompson's saying exactly what we have been saying on this program for quite some time, which is they know that they can run out the clock with the media's help. And so far, so good. There's been a few calls for more interviews and those and the like, but not a lot, or more substance to an extent. And yes, every once in a while you'll see some reporter coming out and saying, we really need to hear from you. But that goes away. They've just now done their due diligence and said that they tried, right? But they're saying that could help, that this could really hurt the Harris campaign, where all of a sudden, if the polls start moving a little bit and they start going down, it's going to be, why do I have Obama holdovers? Why do I have Biden holdovers? Who can we trust? Who can't we trust? Kind of an implosion inside the campaign if the polls don't stay where they're at. But that's also on the flip, not even the flip side of that coin, but like Alex Thompson from Axios says, you know, they believe right now that this campaign is the way to win, which is keep your head down. Keep telepromptered, keep scripted events going. Don't do interviews. Don't get into any real substance. Keep Donald Trump the focus of all this and hope to skate in as a relatively unknown candidate. Because if you look at it, she's speaking at friendly outlets. She's doing Oprah. She's going to smaller town television and radio. The Harris campaign's Brian Fallon told Politico that people were overanalyzing Harris doing very few interviews. Number one, people should not read too much into what some have described as a shortage or a lack of interviews in the first 6 weeks of this campaign. He argued that Harris's media appearances as vice president spoke to what voters should expect of her press interviews in the remaining 50 days. Because Kirsten Allen, who has run her communications office on the official side, had her doing a heavy rotation of daytime talk shows, national print interviews with magazines, national sit-downs with television outlets like 60 Minutes late last year, cable hits. She did like 80-plus interviews in the first 7 months of this year. And so that is a default setting of Kamala Harris in the terms of media engagement. The remaining 50 days of the campaign will look like something closer to that. That's according to her campaign. Okay, let's take a short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. And we are back. Broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you for joining us. A lot of comments from viewers. Let's start. Comment number one. I don't understand why it matters that Harris is spending $5 million a day. All the spending can't reconfigure how she stands on the issues. It is all proven that she is doing nothing but lying to cover up her past. Trump ads just need to display what she actually says and prove what she believes. That will erase anything she currently says. Still $5 million a day. Think of the fact that, and I understand what you're saying, but think of the fact that we're talking about there still being undecided voters that need to be convinced whether or not they'll support Harris or Trump. And unfortunately, we, especially people living in swing states, hate those nonstop political ads, but there's a reason that they play. They are effective. Don't take my word for it. There's a reason why it costs so much to run in these campaigns. But I understand what you're saying. There can be effective use of the money from the Trump campaign. All right. Oh, look at these waves coming in. Boy, we're having a busy wave morning. Okay, another comment from a different viewer. A question for Democrats. Is this Harris the Harris pick, truly who they want to be the first woman president? She falls short of a strong, wise, charismatic example of what historians would have picked to be a trailblazer. Thank you, viewer. And then the last comment for this segment. Good morning, Frank. Well, hey, good morning. As to your question about sports gambling, and if you're just joining us, The Atlantic has a piece out today that says legalizing sports gambling was a huge mistake, and they point to some studies that show, for every $1 spent on betting, households put $2 less in investments for the future. That a household that does online sports betting increases the risk of going bankrupt by 25 to 30%, yada, yada, yada. And we didn't really dive into it deep. It kind of piqued my interest. So this viewer says, I remember when Lotto first came on the scene. It was supposed to be the answer to bring revenue for the school systems and to lower the burden for the taxpayer. We all know how that worked out. Very good point. And some people still joke about that that's how it was originally sold, that the lottery was going to go to schools. What is it that one scratch-off ticket or something like that actually goes to schools and all the others are just in the general coffer? Or it's something just outlandish. But yes, not going to the schools. We know that. So thank you. Government got bigger. Legalizing marijuana was also a great way to make a bigger government. The same goes for the sports betting. Government gets bigger not only with the administration costs, but also the programs for those with gambling problems and drug addiction. There seems to be a pattern forming. Well, the legalizing of marijuana, yeah, how much were we told that was going to bring in revenue? And that, because of the way New York State handled it with the wild, wild west attitude, that did not turn out well. Okay. Already talked about that. Oh, I've been meaning to bring this up all morning. So we're, I guess, maybe on a kind of a crazier note, if you will. This is that kind of silly season right now, as they call it, after Labor Day, up until the general election. But you're going to see every supposed expert, every forecaster, and what their predictions are. And it's always one of those scenarios where this person has got it right except for 2 times in the last 20 years. And you go, well, that's not that great. There's always some leading expert out there. And bad news for Trump, because this person who predicts elections has got them right except for a couple of times. And you go, all right, I guess I'm not going to really hang my hat on it. But let's continue with that tradition of it being silly season. Trump leads in a poll that has predicted every election but one since 1984. That's a pretty impressive record. The poll, coming from Ohio, is called the Cookie Poll. A beloved Cincinnati bakery, whose cookie poll has accurately predicted every election outcome but one since 1984, currently has the former president and Republican nominee leading Kamala Harris in what is considered a very unscientific survey. Here you go. I thought, just for the heck of it, this is a good visual one. Here we go. Those are the cookies. So you have Trump, of course. You have Kamala Harris there. And then that is for basically, I just want a cookie. That's your independent vote. That's your third-party candidate. Trump notched about 54% of the support, having sold 2,953 cookies to Harris's 39%, with an independent smiley face cookie scoring 7%. Per the latest tally shared with the New York Post by Buskin Bakery. Hey, if other news shows, folks, can go to their forecasters. We can too. The cookie poll will remain open until Election Day on November 5th, so the tallies reflect the results of early voting as of right now. We like to, the owner, the CEO of the bakery said, we like to joke and say customers can stuff the ballot box. To contribute data, customers simply purchase a cookie of their preferred candidate. Each cookie purchase counts as a single vote, and there is no limit to how many a customer can buy. Despite the lack of any type of actual scientific method, the poll has been remarkably accurate in the 10 elections it's predicted so far. The only result it missed was actually the last victory by Democrat Joe Biden. Our results out of our 4 retail stores kind of cover the north, south, east, and west portions of Cincinnati, so they're pretty diverse, said Buskin. It definitely is interesting that in a state like Ohio and a city like Cincinnati, that there's been such accuracy in this cookie poll over the years. All right, there you go. If you were curious, we hire a local artist, Jim White, that does caricatures, and he draws a caricature of each candidate. Then we transfer that image to a cookie. It's meant to be fun. But not everyone is having fun due to the contentious nature of politics. Just to show you how wacky things have gotten. Some people this year, especially more than any prior years, have been more vocal and not so friendly about things. But we're moving forward. We've done it for 40 years. We think it's fun. Can you imagine how perfect your life must be? Really, at the end of the day, I mean, you've won. If the only thing you have to get upset about, to get angry about, is that they're selling a cookie of Trump for what is supposed to be a fun poll. I don't know. Enough on that. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier and highlight, let's take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Thank you for joining us. So many waves coming in. I had my screen down during the last break, so kept playing a little catch-up. First of all, a good morning wave. There we go, from Keuka Lake. Looks a little rainy there, as they said. A little choppy. Not too bad. Thank you for the great picture. Always appreciate it. All right. Comments from viewers. $5 million a day can reach a lot of sheeple. Isn't it interesting that the Dems accuse the Republicans of being the party of big money? Thank you, Ken. Yeah, they always talk about the threat of big money, but in this presidential race, big money has played a historic role for the Democrat side of things. So yeah, it's hard to be lectured about being the party of big money, isn't it? Another comment from a different viewer: history deserves a better pick, and that was in reference to the question of, is this who you'd want to, as a Democrat, would this be who you want to be the first female president? Next up, a different comment: I like the cookie poll. What a great idea. Yeah, it is a great idea. It's supposed to be fun. No surprise it turned to people being angry sometimes, but that's not the reason for it. So Trump is, another wave, thank you. Trump is going to return to Butler, which is the site of the first assassination attempt, which you've undoubtedly not forgotten. He plans to return to Butler on October 5th, exactly 1 month before Election Day, according to 3 sources familiar with the campaign schedule. This coming from NBC News. Now, the sources reportedly asked to remain anonymous due to the rally not yet officially being publicly announced. Back on July 26th, if you recall, Trump made the announcement saying, I will be going back to Butler, Pennsylvania for a big and beautiful rally honoring the soul of our beloved firefighter hero, Corey, and those brave patriots injured 2 weeks ago, adding fight, fight, fight. So apparently, it's unclear now if it will be held at the if it will be held at the same site or not. But it looks as if October 5th will be the day. Okay. Speaking of Pennsylvania, because obviously the focus, and many have said that the focus and the road to the White House leads through Pennsylvania. John Fetterman, who is a Democrat from Pennsylvania, the senator from Pennsylvania, who has been very supportive of Israel, but of course is still, at the end of the day, Democrat, so he supports certain candidates and things that Republicans don't always agree with, of course, the nature of politics. But he was very outspoken in support of Israel, very, very much so. But he also kind of gave a warning to Democrats, saying that Trump is going to be strong in Pennsylvania, and we have to respect that. Basically saying, don't take it for granted that Donald Trump is far more popular in Pennsylvania than they think. After being asked what people, such as Pennsylvania voters, people he grew up with and his friends are saying, or what they see in Donald Trump that makes them want to vote for him, Fetterman replied that he knows people who are voting for Trump, even if they are appalled by some of these things. And I never agreed with our approach talking about that he's a convicted felon, Fetterman continued. I mean, I thought Democrats, we were the party that was all about second chances and that we're not going to condemn somebody based on mistakes and that kind of situation. Great point from Fetterman. That people can, rehabilitate themselves, so we don't attack people on their backgrounds. And what have they been doing? And they have been hitting. That was one of the reasons why the lawfare came up, is so that they could have that label of convicted felon on Trump. He also, and the Senator Fetterman continued, I also want people to understand it's not science, but there's energy and there's kinds of anger on the ground in Pennsylvania. And people are very committed. And Trump is going to be strong, and we have to respect that. You can't even understand it, and it's not like a science that can explain it, but you have to just know that it's real. Interesting. Hey, thank you for all these waves coming this morning. Did you see the heartwarming gesture from the former president yesterday? He gave a Pennsylvania mother of 3 $100 towards her groceries while promising to lower the supermarket prices if he's reelected. This was at a campaign stop yesterday. A video shared by his campaign shows Trump handing a woman a bill to a woman checking out at a grocery store called Sprinkles Neighborhood Market in Kittanning, Pennsylvania, as cameras surround the Republican nominee for president. Here, it's going to go down a little, he says, as he hands the woman the money. It just went down $100. Now we all know that, sadly, with today's grocery prices, and for a mother of 3 there, $100 scratches the surface, but it's a start. She said, "Thank you so much." Trump said, well, we'll do that for you from the White House, all right? Then complimented her sons. Trump has promised to tackle growing inflation and lower everyday costs of necessities like groceries and gas for Americans if he wins in the November election. It's a nice video. If you get a chance to see it, you can see it. It was shared by the Trump campaign. Sorry, my headphones are falling apart. So you can find that, the actual video, but kind of a neat idea. Giving $100, showing how expensive grocery store prices have become. Yeah. I mean, heaven only knows what her final bill was for being a mother of 3. We've got more about Pennsylvania, so stay with us. We've got to take a short break. I have so many comments, so many waves coming in. My goodness. I really appreciate it. We do have one New York State issue that I hope that I'll be able to get to. I asked the question just out of pure curiosity. You can weigh in on anything we've discussed today, but we've asked a question about legalizing sports gambling, that it wasn't a huge mistake like the Atlantic contends. Also, would you have rather seen a government shutdown? What are your thoughts about Mike Johnson with the help of Democrats getting the continuing resolution through till December 20th? It looks as if that's the direction it's headed. They'll vote on it tomorrow. What's your thoughts there? Also, just about the topics we've been discussing in general. One quick announcement that we want to help our friends over at the library. And as I mentioned this yesterday, don't forget the book sale continues. It is today at 100 Nazar Civic Center in Corning. Today from 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. And the important point to note is cash or checks only, and that is the fall book sale at the USW Local 1000 Union Hall. All right, stay with us. Let me get that off the screen. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us. A couple comments from viewers. I'd probably buy one of each cookie and save the Trump and eat the Harris cookie. Well, thank you. Next up, Frank, I would say the cookie poll has been 100% accurate since inception in predicting the actual winners of presidential elections. Thank you, Ken. And finally, good morning, Frank. Well, hey, we're going to count that. Good morning. And we had another good morning earlier, too. I just have lost any faith in our elections. I don't believe that it is the honest system of years past. I don't know if we can ever return to fair elections. We'll have to have, we actually have a voting program that'll be coming up, and I'll tell you when it's going to happen. We're talking to the Board of Elections. We're going to be talking with Joe Sempolinski, a representative from the Democrats. It's just to give you an idea of the voting process itself if you've never been involved with it before. And hopefully some of it will ease your mind on that to an extent. Okay, so Trump vows to unleash energy in key swing states, pumping, fracking, drilling, and producing like never before, he said in Pennsylvania. If you vote for me, I will cut your energy and electricity prices in half within 12 months. Noting that the skyrocketing cost of energy and electricity, the latter of which has soared nearly 30% under the Harris-Biden administration, according to the recent Wall Street Journal analysis. I will terminate the natural gas export ban, which makes it impossible for you to sell your product to a lot of countries that want it desperately. We have all of this stuff, more than anybody, and we don't use it, he said. I will get Pennsylvania energy workers pumping, fracking, drilling, and producing like never before. In his latest pitch, he attacked Harris as the candidate of the tax collector and the Washington bureaucrats while calling himself the candidate of the American worker. He railed against the Democrat nominee's various proposals to raise taxes and said her biggest tax hike of all is her vicious attacks on Pennsylvania energy. Just a few months ago, Kamala imposed a natural gas export ban that is brutalizing Pennsylvania energy jobs, Trump said. Trump also dismissed Harris's recent flip-flop on fracking, arguing if anybody here believes that Harris will let your energy industry continue like fracking, you should immediately go to a psychiatrist and have your head examined. On dozens of occasions, Kamala has said that she intends to ban fracking. And we talked about it yesterday where it was a recently unearthed tape from her time on Jimmy Fallon where she said the same thing. We are an energy country. That's our history. All right. Trump also said that he would demand China's Xi Jinping to follow through on his $50 billion farming deal. Now, this caught my attention at first because we know that, to a viewer's comment early on in the program, that China has been trying to buy up a lot of farmland. So I thought, what was this all about? So this was in Smithton, Pennsylvania. And he said, my first call, I'm going to call up President Xi. I'm going to say, you have to honor your deal that you made. You made a deal. You'd buy $50 billion worth of American farm product. And I guarantee you he will buy it. 100%, he will buy it. So it was actually about farm product. Think that would do for the farmers. My goodness, $50 billion. The former president struck a deal with China in his first term in tariff negotiations between the U.S. and Beijing, which he said included an agreement for Xi to buy $50 billion worth of American agricultural goods. Now Trump says China is not living up to it. He also blasted the Harris-Biden administration for how they've handled relations with China during their term